All right, now we are going to talk about the teachings of Islam. So, it's important to start off with the background of the teachings of Islam. First, its impact after the death of Muhammad and the 200 years preceding it. Islam spread very far throughout Europe, starting in the Middle East and spreading kind of in both directions. All directions, I should say. As I mentioned, it started with the Prophet Muhammad, as we learned about last week. There was various different reasons for why it spread so quickly. The main one being that the Middle East was smack dab in the middle of where most of the trade and stuff went through, but also because it was kind of like a unifying religion, so to speak, since most of the Middle East was worshiped various different gods and were mostly tribal. Islam was able to spread relatively easy through those areas and kind of unified the people. It has a very distinct relation to certain other religions in the sense that it's what's called a monotheistic religion. A monotheistic religion is a religion that only worships one God. It doesn't believe in there being multiple gods, but one supreme being who kind of rules over and created all of the universe. And so the Islamic faith, it originated from essentially the same roots as Judaism, which the modern day Jews practice, and Christianity, which also includes Catholicism as well. They all descend from the belief in the common ancestor of Abraham, who's considered to be the father of the faith. So the Quran and the Sunnah, and also I apologize ahead of time if I mispronounce any of these names, but just bear with me. So the Quran's role, the Quran is the holy book, which is essentially originated from the Prophet Muhammad, who was believed to be the messenger of God by the Muslim people. And essentially he was given, as we learned last week, certain revelations or divine teachings from the angel Gabriel, who was sent by God to give him these revelations or these new teachings. And throughout his life, he never learned to read or write, and so the Quran is essentially his teachings that were written down by others, and then later finalized after his death, and essentially the counterfeit pieces, so to speak, were destroyed. Now the practice of the Quran's teaching is known as the Sunnah, and what the Sunnah is essentially the way Muhammad demonstrated kind of walking out the Quran's teachings. 200 years after Muhammad's death, as Islam was spreading, many different reports were gathered by scholars of that time and verified. These are called hadiths. They're sort of research, so to speak. So essentially, Islam is basically, in the practice of the Islamic faith, there's 5 basic pillars of worship which all of their faith is based on. The first one is Shahada, or the Declaration Profession of Faith. It first has people proclaim that there's one God who created all of the heavens and the earth, and that Muhammad is that one God's prophet. So the first thing you need to do in the Islamic faith is make that declaration part of your life. The second pillar of their faith, or foundational piece of their faith, is daily ritual prayer. And so they are required to pray 5 times a day. And not only are they required to pray 5 times a day, but there's a lot of ritual that goes into it, including making sure to wash up really good their hands, feet, arms, face, etc., before they even pray. And so there's certain times that Muslims are required to pray throughout the day. And this is all, in a sense, a way to sort of speak to God. There's other aspects of this ritual, but I'm not going to go into too much detail. The third one is zakat, or almsgiving. This is kind of giving to the poor or the needy. Muhammad had a belief that the rich were meant to give their riches to better support the poor of the society. And so we see this in their almsgiving, in that they're required to give, I think it's like 2.5% of their income, but encouraged to give more to help out those who are in need or poor. And so the money goes to all kinds of things. They can either give it to a religious leader to distribute, or they can find and distribute it themselves to those who are poor or in need. The next of the 5 pillars is Siyam, which is fasting. You particularly see this in the 9th month of the Islamic calendar, where the people of the Islamic faith fast for an entire 40 days, or for the entire month, where they go essentially without food from sunrise to sunset. Once sun sets, they essentially have a meal with family and friends. And then also during the time when they're fasting or going without food, essentially they spend a lot of time doing certain rituals. It's also meant for a way of learning self-control, and teaching the people what it would be like if they weren't blessed to be wealthy enough to afford food and they were poor. Now, there's certain people that are excluded from the fast, such as pregnant women, children, stuff like that. But generally speaking, most Muslims are required to fast at least during the month of Ramadan. The 5th and final pillar of the basic worship in the Islamic faith is the pilgrimage to Mecca. Now, it's not a regular trip that people are supposed to take, but rather a religious travel to what's called Mecca, which is the holy city of the Muslim faith. And so while there's all kinds of certain things that Muslims are supposed to do, both upon getting there and then upon leaving as well, and while there. All right, so those are the 5 pillars in a nutshell. There's a lot more to each one of them, and really that doesn't do them justice just kind of quickly going over them. But for time's sake, that's all we're going to do for tonight and today. So a jihad is that the belief that it's like a struggle within with spiritual significance. So with jihad, the term jihad is that war is permissible, meaning that war can be okay if the reasoning is right. But contrary to the media's belief, certain people aren't allowed to be hurt during a jihad. So, for example, women and children are not supposed to be hurt. Neither are elderly, stuff like that. So, for example, the bombing of the Twin Towers on 9/11 would go against the idea of the jihad because of the fact that you weren't supposed to hurt women and children, stuff like that. So Muhammad said there was a such thing as a lesser and greater jihad. So the lesser of the jihad would be things like war for righteous reasons or fighting a good cause. And the greater jihad, according to Muhammad, was sort of the inner fight to do what's right and what's pleasing in God's sight. All right, so the final part of this lesson is the Islamic law called the Sharia, and it governs every part of everyday life for the Islamic people. It's the basis of their faith, what they base their whole life on. So every action they do is supposed to be based on their law. In fact, originally they had a whole court system set up based on this religious law, that had various different ranges, all the way from things that are 100% not acceptable to things that people can do and things that just shouldn't be done. So kind of everywhere in between as well. Eventually, however, as most Muslim territories began to be conquered by other European countries, it was the Islamic law was replaced with European laws in every area except for the most part family court, where some Islamic laws still kind of govern that. That is the teachings of Islam.